All right. The Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is live here on a Sunday afternoon, little afternoon, on February 2nd, 2025. Thanks, everyone, for joining here ahead of the Buffalo Sabres contest matinee engagement with the New Jersey Devils today at KeyBank Center. I'm your co-host, Kris Baker. You can find me on X at Sabres Prospects. I still want to call it Twitter. I don't like saying X, but whatever. We'll get into that at a future episode, Matthew. And with me, as always, is your Sabres writer for The Athletic, Matthew Fairburn. You can find all of Matthew's work at theathletic.com/Sabres. A lot going on, Matthew, in the business of hockey this week, and I think that we should just jump right into it. We can talk about the game at a later date because the game within the game started being played with the NHL announcing changes to its salary cap moving forward in terms of its upper and lower limits. And I think it's worth a discussion today just about how that impacts the Buffalo Sabres. And at a high level, I think we can kind of kick off just the nuts and bolts, Matthew, of the cap in terms of the numbers that were shared by the league. And then also a thought that's been put out there with one of your colleagues, I believe it was Pierre Lebrun this week, about what this landscape looks like moving forward, potentially with the cap numbers that are going to be in place for the next couple of years. Matthew, I'm going to pass it over to you. If you could, please, for our listeners that may not be aware, if you want to just recap what the league shared in terms of upper and lower limits and maybe some thoughts on that LeBron commentary this week.
Yeah, this is going to be a big jump for the salary cap. You're looking at right now there's an $88 million cap ceiling. And next year, the estimate is that it'll be 95.5. The following year, it'll be 104. And the year after that, it'll be 113.5. So the cap has been flat for quite a while before this season. It took a minor jump, and now it's going to be taking substantial jumps, 7.5, and then 9.5, and then another 9.5. So it is a lot of extra money to play with. With that, the floor is also going up, right? So the floor goes up to 70.6 next year, 76.9 the year after, and 83.9 the year after that. For context, the Sabres' current player payroll is at about 81.8 estimated according to Puckpedia. So they're underneath what the floor will be in a couple of years. I mean, it's a big jumps up, and that leads into Pierre's point or thought he was asking around the league about, is this going to widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots in the NHL? Because you have to wonder, is every single team going to spend to that upper limit? I think as of right now, with this cap being at 88, there's already a handful of teams, the Sabres among them, who don't spend to the salary cap, right? You have, I would say, maybe not quite a third of the league, but there are some teams who don't spend all the way up there. As that continues to go up, are you going to be in a spot where even more teams don't get to that point? It's going to be interesting to see. And now that you have multiple year clarity over this situation, it provides quite a bit of information for agents and teams, but agents to be able to say, okay, what percentage of the cap on these multi-year deals? I wonder, as an aside, if it will be, a player like Tage Thompson, for example, signed that long deal, $7 million a year. It's going to look like an absolute steal. I mean, it looked like a steal shortly after he signed it because of the way he produced. But will players be a little bit more hesitant now that they see this regular growth? Because if it's going to jump up that much in 2 years, the expectation would be it would continue to grow. And the freeze that happened because of the pandemic is, a thing of the past. So maybe some of these guys that rush to sign 8-year deals, maybe their calculus on that decision-making will be a little bit different. The Sabres, this is extremely relevant to the Sabres, right? For a variety of reasons. I think one being they have quite a few RFAs to handle this summer, a few UFAs as well, but the RFA is probably more important to the long-term picture of what they're doing. At the moment, if you look at their future cap projections, they're looking at They have 61 million on the payroll for next season, 49 after that, 45 the year after that. So that's 33 million in space next year, 54 million the year after, and 68 million the year after that. They have Bo Byram, JJ Paterka, Jack Quinn, Ryan McLeod. Less important now would be Devin Levi now that he's in the minors. You got Jordan Greenway, Henry Okiharu, Jason Zucker as your upcoming UFAs. Byram now has a picture in his head, right? He's been playing basically the full season as a top pair defenseman, sometimes as your number one defenseman because Dahlin's been banged up. And they have team control, they have leverage to an extent, but if you're talking about a long-term deal, the numbers have gone up since the summer, right? I think JJ Paterka might be in the same boat, even though he's not lighting the world on fire this year. His stats are pretty similar to what they were last year. If you want to get him locked up long term, I think you're looking at a bigger number probably than you were in the summer. Now, some of this is probably known or estimated by agents and teams. They were probably ballparking some of these figures, but I think the amount it jumped up probably, especially with the multi-year clarity, is something we haven't seen before. We really don't see it a lot in other sports either. Brandon Bean was talking this week about not knowing the real true cap number other than estimates and what they can kind of do internally until the combine, the week before the combine. That's like a few weeks before free agency in the NFL. So to have this type of, projection is going to make negotiations really interesting. It also, if we're talking about the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, it's kind of time for the Sabres to step up here, right? If it's win now mode, if it's, this is a window of contention potentially. I mean, I recognize we're talking about the last place team in the Eastern Conference, but I don't think regardless of what happens in the front office or anything else, whatever changes they do or do not decide to make, I don't think it's going to change the fact that whoever's in that seat is thinking about turning this team into a contender. And now with all that money to spend, if you don't spend it, it's going to become even more obvious, right? And it's going to be even more of a disadvantage because there's so much more money for teams to spend that you have more competition now for the free agents than you might have the last couple of years. Speaks to probably a little bit of a missed opportunity the last couple of years, as we've talked about a bunch, but also maybe a little bit of a missed opportunity not getting your guys locked up sooner.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting right now. There is the possibility that agents suspected that this was coming, maybe not at the magnitude that it did come. And maybe Kevin Adams did engage with Paterka's agent, and maybe they said, no, we got to wait. We got to understand what the cap is. I mean, maybe Kevin was doing his job trying to get some of these guys locked up. We don't know that, right? But like for JJ Paterka, who had a down year, maybe he was thinking that he was due a bigger number coming into the season based on how he finished last year, and he kind of steps back a little bit. Now it doesn't matter for him, right? Because Paterka was probably on a long-term deal, maybe projected to get about 7% of the cap under the old terms. Say it is 7% still. That 7% is still a lot more dollars. I think that, so it's going to be interesting. Same thing with Byram. Byram was probably, say again, I'm theorizing that Kevin Adams has already had discussions with Byram's agent, maybe. I don't know if you know, I know, but maybe he did.
One would hope.
Hope, right? And again, smart to wait because Byram has probably increased his value. Say on a long-term deal, he was at 7.5% of the cap. He's 7.5%, might even be more, 7.75%. I don't know if he's an 8%. He might be. But he's, I think, done his job this year. Top pair, playing with Dahlin, really showed his value to the team, showed his value to the league, and now the cap goes up. Very interesting environment now. The next 6 months, I think, are going to be really interesting. I think maybe now you'll start to see some answers to those questions about signing these guys. Kevin Adams talked about it, right? I mean, you mentioned it previously on this show. We've talked about it. He came into this season saying that he was saving space and allocating dollars for the next guys up. And you already mentioned them. Well, are we going to see bridge deals? because you only have 3 years of cap monies known. Is that right? But with the
next
expectation, it's gonna
3.
keep,
But I would think the expectation, as long as the game remains healthy, is that it'll continue to climb. And so that creates a. I think the smart agents were waiting right last summer and trying not to get too eager to sign when they knew this type of thing could be coming. But you talk about percentage of the cap, which is usually how these things are negotiated. But when there's big gaps in the raw number that you're dealing with, it makes negotiations really interesting. A lot less cut and dry than they were when the cap was flat for so long.
Hey, Matt, can you confirm that was actually the goal horn being tested and it wasn't the ship coming into port with all the money that Pagula and Adams are going to need to sign these guys? Was that the goal horn?
It was the goal horn, but easy to confuse the two because the bill is coming due here, right? Like, even that cap floor being above, the cap floor is pretty close to the cap, what the cap was last year. So it's overdue that they're, having these increases, and it should create an urgency, A, to spend, but B, to ice a winning product, because that's good for business. We've talked a lot about the revenue they've missed out on by missing the playoffs and how it would be a lot easier to stomach the big numbers. The haves and the have-nots in this case, yeah, you got your small market teams, right, that are the have-nots. The have-nots are also the Sabres have the double whammy of being a small market team and a team that does not get playoff revenue. So,
and doesn't draw out the gate in the regular season. I mean, it's
right.
a very compelling, concerning economic picture right now. With that, right? Like, I think that, before the JT Miller deal was consummated with the Rangers, once you had this cap news, you're like, he has to almost go out and get Elias Pettersson, almost because of the $11+ million that he helps get you to the cap.
Right. Well,
another player like that also, could refine his game and lead to a better product, help with recruiting efforts, and actually get more asses in the seats at the arena also for the 41 home games that they have.
Well, and you could see too how this changed the market pretty quickly, right? JT Miller's contract under these cap numbers, I think, is easier to swallow, accelerated that deal, probably changes the market for Pettersson. Thomas Drance at The Athletic, our Canucks writer, said, he's probably off the block for now, but you have teams that now have a lot more cap space. Different teams are going to enter the picture to maybe take a risk on an $11.6 million player who's not performing to that number because there's more room, more wiggle room. But also, his point was that if Pettersson does continue to struggle to close out the year, they've shown they'll be decisive and try to, act quickly and get rid of a guy if they feel like that's the best thing to do. So that would be an off season. That seems like now it's going to be an off season discussion, I think, for the Canucks and other teams in the league. But things are about to get really interesting in the next 6 months. And like we've said all along, or I say pretty frequently here, is that you can say that you're willing, Terry Pagula is willing to use every resource needed to feel, ice a winning team. The actions are what really tell you, and they have not spent to the cap for quite a while. So it would become even more glaring, with what Pierre was writing about and, these numbers. The actions are going to tell the story of how serious they are about putting together a winning product, because it's not everything, right? I don't think you can sit there as a general manager anymore. Like in December, Kevin Adams said, he doesn't really worry too much about cap space or think about it in that way. You have to think about it in that way. I think you always had to. You especially have to now. I mean, listen to or go read the comments that Carolina's general manager had after making the Mikko Rantanen trade. And the way he views cap space as basically the most important asset you have in the league. It's the currency by which you put together your team. And the way they were, he's conceptualizing it and thinking about it, even if Rantanen walks away, is like, okay, well, then we have all that cap space. What are we going to do with it? And to sit here and try to spin it as you don't really worry about that, it's time to worry about it, because a lot of other teams are worried about it. A lot of other teams are interested in squeezing every dollar out of the cap, and they're going to do it. And they're going to get better players, and they're going to beat you, as they've been doing for 14 years.
This makes it very hard especially I think this offseason, the next two, to really understand what an overpayment is on a player. You know what I mean? Because
it's going to be weird. It'll be like that weird NBA offseason, right? When you had some names that you're like, wow, life is good in the NBA right now because these guys are getting massive contracts. And there's going to be teams that are scrambling to get to the floor.
Well, Buffalo's one of them.
Right. So there will be some overpays, and it makes long-term contract negotiations interesting. It's going to make free agency really interesting. It should theoretically open up the trade market, right? Because there's just more flexibility, helps all sorts of deals get done. So, hey, that would be a good thing. The player movement's exciting. It's fun. The trades we've gotten in the last couple of weeks in the league have been great. Kind of reminds me of the Michael Scott meme from The Office, where he's like, I love inside jokes. I'd love to be a part of one someday. I'm sure that's how Sabres fans are feeling about trades right now. But there's no excuse when the cap is this high and they already have space. They already have assets. This is actually in a vacuum, a good situation for a general manager with the young talent, cap space, the assets, the flexibility. The big variable, of course, is ownership's willing to spend. You remove that variable on the outside looking in, you would look at this and think, great situation. The ownership situation is the big question mark.
Well, so on the assumption that, that's an interesting conversation, right? So because the Sabres are going to have to do some things to get the revenue, I think, to more money to find more money to pay more players. The Sabres, in theory, could be more attractive to players that maybe they weren't a couple weeks ago as attractive to, right? They're going to have space, so they got to find the money to pay them. That actually could work in their favor if they are, to your point, planning to pay. It's funny, a week ago I was saying, wow, Kulik's moving in a good direction. Or 2 weeks ago, that $887,000 cap hit, boy, what a great resource that is. Now I'm like, man, I almost wish he was making more money, because I think it's going to be tough for them to get to the floor.
Right.
At least next year, or in a couple of years, but we'll see. That's a really good point, though. Where's the money going to come from, though? Right?
Well, it's such a chicken or an egg thing, right? Like, you need to win to generate revenue, and you need to spend to win in this league.
And they haven't. That's why I'm asking, where's the money going to come from?
Right, exactly. I mean, life's pretty good with the football team lately. That thing's just a cash machine. That there's money hanging around right now. Here's another interesting thing, and this is a completely different conversation. But our reporters in Pittsburgh, Rob Rossi, and I think ESPN might have reported this first, that the Penguins are looking to do sort of a minority ownership type of thing. Fenway Sports Group is looking to do. They did that with the Steelers, I believe. I believe the Steelers owners did that. The Bills, obviously,
Bills just did it.
The example everybody knows here. There's a few teams in the NFL that have done it, so apologies if I misspoke on the Steelers, but it is a model we've seen in the NFL. I know the Raiders, the Bills, I believe the Dolphins as well. That's a way to generate cash on your asset, right? And might be an interesting way here for them to, generate some more cash, maybe just a different jolt of energy into a team. I mean, look at Tom Brady buying into a small portion of the Raiders. Feels like it's brought them a little bit of credibility in their coaching search and, as they navigate an off season. So seeing that come out of Pittsburgh definitely raised my eyebrows, because I'm like, that's something I think they should think about when you talk about where does the money come from. But just when, I mean, it's the cost of doing business, right? It is the cost if you want to be a competitive NHL team, and there's financial incentive to do so, to fill this building, in playoff games. Terry Pegula, in his time as owner, has gotten 3 games of playoff revenue. 3 games. And, you need much more than that. That's not viable, really. And so I don't think too many people are going to be interested in hearing, oh, boy, it's got to be tough to spend, when you haven't been winning. I think that's the thing that comes first, right? Spend the money, you'll win, and you get your return on investment. This is a much better business if you're a winning hockey team and you're filling up the rink.
It's going to be interesting, right? Because Kevin Adams has been saying that ownership was committed. They'd spend money when they had to. Well, now they have to. So we're going to find out, like, if that was really true, because we haven't seen it in 5 years. How many consecutive years has it been
since the pandemic? Which I think is really the biggest. If you want to defend Kevin Adams, not many people are interested in doing so these days, for good reason. I don't think there's a lot of strong hockey cases to be made in terms of how he's done his job and why he deserves more time. But the piece of context is that they haven't spent to the cap the entire time, right? So since the pandemic, that has seemingly been, the actions have suggested that's been a mandate. And so, I mean, it's a weird defense of him, right? Because, all it does is say that there's another problem too, right? Yeah. That he's not the only problem, which I think everybody also knows. So this got my gears turning with this cap announcement, because it's now becoming more expensive to do business in the NHL. The owners have had it pretty good here with the flat cap, and obviously they had to take it on the chin a little bit during the pandemic, but not for too long. And the game's in a pretty good place at the moment, and now the players are going to get theirs. Also, interesting wrinkle is that CBA talks have begun, very early stages, but be interesting if the structure of how the cap is calculated changes at all, or how that might impact any of this. We'll see how those talks go. Very, very early at the moment, but encouraging that they've at least gotten underway.
My head hurts thinking about this. It really does, because
a lot of math, a lot of numbers.
Well, there's a lot of math that, I don't claim to know the entire financial health of the Sabres balance sheet, and what their expenses are and the profitability and, variable EBITDA on their business. But it's implied that it could be healthier. And you bring up minority ownership and things like that as possibility. That seems like that would be maybe a difficult task. I don't know.
Well, that's a good point, right? I think,
so
how attractive are they? But there's only so many of these teams.
Well, we saw the valuations all come out too, and the numbers. There's a big disparity between where the Sabres are and the teams at the top. And so, yeah, there's 2 ways to look at it, right? You can invest at a lower level, get a greater percentage of this asset. And one of 32.
A lot of room for growth, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. Yeah, to your point, what the exact health financially of the organization is, or like you said, it's a separate business from the Bills. So I don't think Pegula is thinking in that way that the Bills can subsidize the Sabres necessarily. But
I don't get the vibe that they're looking to do that, like taking money out of one pocket and putting it into another, and that Pegula pants. I don't think that is what they want to do.
The pockets of the Pegula pants. I think there should be enough money to, spend to the salary cap. I think regardless of.
Yeah.
And I think people have wised up to, this place has not been very full this year. People are not interested in spending unless you're super clear that you're committed to winning. And that goes beyond words. That beyond going say win now and all this. It goes to actionable things that you can do, like spending to the cap and like, maxing out your spending on non-player, related hockey resources. So
besides the roof, right? Well, so
besides a
here's the
roof
thing.
and a
Besides the
scoreboard,
roof, right? So when in terms of discussing these 3 years worth of cap projections of an upper and lower limit, my mind goes to the lower limit. But really, like, my commentary and like the questions and the dialogue we're having is about, not about are they going to get to the floor? It's not about that. It's about, are they going to be able to ice a competitive team when there are others? It goes back to that haves and the have-nots. And it's going to take more money to do that beyond getting to the floor. And if you don't get minority owners, who's going to shoulder the cost of doing that business?
it's
The
Terry
fans.
Pegula.
Or Terry Pegula, or both. Yeah, I mean, it's
right.
got to be Terry Pegula ultimately. He owns the team. But I mean, are they going to, it's going to be interesting to watch in terms of costs associated with going to a game moving forward, I think.
That's another interesting point. That's a good point by you, that we see it in all walks of life, right? The cost getting passed on to the consumer at some point down the road. So it's going to be
everything's gone up.
It's going to be an interesting 6 months, to a year here to see which direction they go with all this, because the gap could grow. I mean, this is such a big jump. It's not going to be baseball, right? Where one team can just way outspend another one. But we already see a decent gap in how much teams are, pouring into player salaries. So now is going to be the time to do it. You have what you say is a win now window. Because I think even they're in last place in the Eastern Conference, right? We know that it is not win right this second, obviously. This season is pretty much toast. But I do believe that no matter what you do in the offseason, as far as your front office, your coaching staff, any of those decisions that Terry Pegula makes whenever he decides to make them, I do believe you don't need to completely tear it down. In fact, I don't think you see a lot of teams even do that around the league anyways. I think you have enough built up to continue to try to open up a competitive window. But it is going to require some savvy GMing, because we know there are obstacles in Buffalo that go beyond a GM's control, as were outlined in December. But also it's going to take a commitment financially. And we're going to find out really
we haven't seen
to what level they're willing to do that on both fronts, right? Because we have seen very little action from Kevin Adams. They waived Nicolas Aubé-Kubel, so that was something.
Yeah, $1.5 million in the minors. Yep. Scored in his first game.
Claim James Reimer, who was already on the team beforehand. Otherwise, have done nothing.
Yeah,
a lot of action around the league that we've seen. Action that's having noticeable impact. I mean, Capo Caco is playing quite well in Seattle. Dante Fabro latched on in Columbus and doing pretty well. JT Miller had a couple goals yesterday. He was never really an option for the Sabres. Mikko Rantanen was not really, something that they could even consider. But point being, stuff's happening. Things are shaking loose in the league. And Kevin Adams did speak on Friday. That's probably another thing to get to. He spoke on WGR, didn't say a whole lot. The majority of the conversation was about Rob Ray, which great night for Rob Ray. A lot of fun seeing all the alumni and seeing Rob in that environment, right? Getting that moment was pretty cool. Fans were loving it. Team won. It was kind of a badly needed feel-good night at the arena for the fans and for the team. But Kevin Adams did say that he's not looking to sell at the deadline. He's trying to make the team better. He's talked with Zucker and Zucker's agents. interested in bringing him back, and same with Greenway. Really interested in making Byram a long-term piece. Nothing too shocking, nothing too revelatory, but not being a seller, which I think we all assumed, was, somewhat noteworthy. And so we'll see if there are any of those hockey trades that are so hard to make that keep happening around the league. We'll see if any of those happen here in Buffalo.
Yeah, I think the hope that Sabres fans have to have, I know the palm trees and the taxes and things like that, right? The cost of living is still relatively low, and the salary possibilities going up for these players. Maybe that opens things up for the Sabres to get players that maybe previously didn't look too fondly on the potential of being a Buffalo Sabre. Maybe it opens things up a little bit. I keep going back to that. But yeah, to your point though, but let me shift gears. I had to get that thought out because this popped into my head. Maybe that is like, maybe that cost of living helps regardless.
The cost of living really, if you think about it, has to offset a lot of the taxes, right?
Yes.
Doesn't it? Wouldn't you think? If the money, if you're just using taxes, you're talking about Florida, Vegas, Florida, Tampa and Fort Lauderdale, more expensive real estate markets than here. Dallas is probably a more expensive real estate market, at least not majorly maybe, but I would think that the cost of living in Buffalo should offset a lot of that. And
I think so.
As these players have more money to play with, that should be a pretty good selling point.
The Sabres marketing department needs to really formulate a package to send that out to agents and the PA and things like that about that selling point. Honestly, weaponize the cost of living.
Do whatever you can. Don't talk about the bad stuff.
Right.
Who cares about that? And stuff that's out of your control, frankly. Kevin Adams doesn't have a say in New York State's tax policy. I suppose he could plant palm trees around the arena, but I don't think they would. I don't think they would last very long. Hammer on the stuff that's good and in your control. Get some alumni involved, the guys that have stuck around, that maybe didn't even want to be here in the first place, that have stuck around and spent time here, lived here, made their lives here. A lot of them were here on Friday, right? I mean, look at Rob Ray, guy that was not from here and made his whole life here. So that's what you strive to create. And you're a salesman when you're the GM of the Buffalo Sabres, just like Brandon Beane has to be.
Yeah.
There's probably still guys that pick up the phone and are like, boy, I don't know. He's got some good sales tactics to work with now, right? Josh Allen, the competitive play. That's what it all comes down to. But there are other factors, especially
it's going to help,
especially with your client. The clientele you're working with in hockey. We talked about it before, but 80% of the league is from cold weather places a lot like Buffalo. So maybe there's an opportunity here if they're willing to take advantage of it.
We're about 15 minutes to puck drop. Sabres taking on the New Jersey Devils today down at KeyBank Center. Couple things. We should talk just briefly about the team. I did want to say just about Razor. Everything that you hear about Rob Ray is totally true in terms of just being a really good guy. I've worked with him on different things, doing color with him for prospect tournaments and over the summer. Used to go on his show back on Indian Church Road when he did his show called The Enforcers. Have known Rob a while. Sometimes in hockey, there's former players that think just because you didn't play the game that you don't know what you're talking about. Rob never made me feel that way. I think Rob always understood like the work that you put in and just carving out your own niche. And I think he kind of respected that. He's just a real good dude. So I was really, really happy for him and his family. He's worked really hard to become a good broadcaster. I think that he's really good at seeing the game. And it wasn't always like that. He had to work at it. And he shared some of the things that helped him. I think he's awesome guy. And wouldn't call him a friend or anything like that, but like if I see him outside, he would know who I was. We talk, and he remembers me. He's a good, really good human being. On that note, though, we should talk a little bit about the team. They're in win now mode. They've won 2 in a row.
That's right.
And we talked about Yuri Kulik recently and shared some thoughts on him. He just keeps ascending. You had a stat that I thought was interesting about Kulik that I think you put out on social media during the game or right after the game against Nashville the other night. Do you know the stat that I'm referring to?
He's tied with Elias Pettersson with 11 goals this year.
All this talk about Pettersson and this guy making 11 plus million. What is it? 11.6? Is that its cap? Something like that. No, Kulik is on a
cost
point
per goal. Kulik's he's economic, efficient, and effective.
Yeah, no, he's crushing it. He's the poster child for the Buffalo Sabres right now. Find a version of him that you can pay 6-7 million next season. But I think he's also on pace. His goals per game in a complete season, he'd be on a 25 goal pace right now. It's pretty good for a 25-year-old who spent half of his resume thus far learning how to play in the NHL. But you're seeing him really start to figure it out. Thoughts on what's going on around Kulik? Because like my biggest takeaway with the cap news, and Tage, I think Tage is playing pretty well as a winger, but it does suck to be Tage Thompson.
It does,
right? With all this cap news and the contract that he signed, but
$50 million is a good life, but could have got a lot more. Obviously, even if he had waited 6 months, like when they got him under contract was that was one of Kevin Adams' best moves. It was also pointed out to me when I put out that stat about Kulik. Victor Olofsson also has 11 goals this year. So, I don't know. Numbers are funny sometimes. But the way Kulik is playing opens up some options for them. Number one being Tage Thompson as a winger, which Lindy Ruff really seems to be a fan of. I like it. We talked about it, I think, early in the year before
coming into the season, making that recommendation actually. But you needed someone like Kulik to make it happen.
You needed, the center depth to step up. You needed somebody to emerge. But it was also a topic of conversation in the offseason, right? If you don't just need to look at top 6 wingers. If you find a top 6 center, you can push one of these guys to wing. Cousins is also a candidate to do that, right?
Because we thought it was going to be Cousins
because of how he's played for Team Canada. But I think what's worked for Tage Thompson is a little less effort expended in the defensive zone and just able to be more efficient with his energy. First guy in, creating a lot. I mean, he's a good playmaker.
Ahead of the play more.
Yeah, he's he's able to sort of dictate what happens in the offensive zone and kind of set things up. And it's actually really helped JJ Peterka too. The whole combination that they have going. I think we talk a lot about chemistry, right? And how quickly some guys develop chemistry. I think in a case like this, it's because Kulik is so hockey smart. He has such great on-ice awareness and hockey IQ that we can mistake that for chemistry sometimes. And it's not to say that they don't have chemistry, because I think there is some natural chemistry that's developed there. But it always looks that way when you have smart players playing together. And I think Tage Thompson deserves a lot of credit because he has helped Yuri Kulik on and off the ice, right, with different things. And that's the guy you want helping him, right? Yeah. Absolute, your best goal scorer to have, and one of your leaders to take him under his wing, but also to have the humble approach of playing the wing. That, look, a lot of times it's not really up to him, right? He's not the coach, but we know how this league works and how player power can be, wielded in certain situations. And Tage Thompson has just said, the word he said when I asked him about it last week was adaptable. He wants to be adaptable to whoever they want him to play with and whatever position they want him to play. Easier to do when it's working, right? It's easier for Lindy Ruff to convince him when he's scoring like this. But I do think he deserves credit for being able to swallow that and let a rookie play in the middle, recognizing that it's actually better for him and better for the team.
That's part of the leadership that you've talked about with Tage Thompson and the maturation of him as a human being and a hockey player. You've discussed that at various points this season when we talked earlier on about the captaincy and you were throwing Tage's name around. That's proof of a lot of those things that you were seeing in Tage, especially off the ice, I think. Sabres going 11-7 today. So they're sticking with Peterka, Kulik, and Thompson. Cousins will be between Zucker and Tuck. Benson is off of that fourth line. So Benson will be left wing with McLeod and Quinn. And then Malenstein and Krebs are your 10th and 11th forwards. Darlene Byram, Samuelson Power, Bryson, Yoki Haru with Gilbert as the extra D. Kozak, Clifton, Lafferty are your scratches. And looks like UPL and net confirmed. I don't know if you have a vantage point. I'm assuming that Luukkonen's playing today. I don't know if that was announced previously.
The lights have just gone out as they get
ready
for the pregame introduction. So if anyone's wondering why I am suddenly in the dark, it's because they've started the pregame ceremony here.
Well, no, that's all right. I think we can get you out if you're good with that. Get you in position for puck drop here in a couple minutes. No, good cap discussion today. I'm still kind of in my mind, still kind of figuring things out and trying to really figure out what it means. There's going to be a lot of, I think, overreactions to contracts that get handed out moving forward. What's Jason Zucker going to get? What's, like something like that, because we talked about 5 million. Maybe it's a little bit more now. But at any rate, Sabres Devils coming up. Matthew, good job today battling the house band and all the noise there down at the arena. I think holding that mic up close to your jacket, I think helped out. So no, good job. I didn't see any, I wasn't reading the chat, but I didn't see any complaints in the chat. But I did see a chat here. Is the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show not doing comments anymore? When there's time, or when it's easily noticed. I'm always more following the conversation I'm having with Matthew, being present for him and having a good discussion than I am reading the chat. The chat usually becomes a luxury. You can always super chat because those do stick out. It costs a couple bucks, but you can always do that. That'll definitely get read. 100% of the super chats will get read. Probably not the best answer that people want. No one likes spending money, but we will do that always. But at any rate, Matthew, I'm going to get us out of here. Do you want to battle the environment for a couple more seconds to get your plugs in before I let you go?
I think people know where to find me at this point. So theathletic.com/Sabres, whatever social media platform you use, I'm probably there. So, yeah, we'll see what happens today, but we'll have plenty on some of the stuff we talked about and some other stuff in a notebook either later today or early tomorrow morning. So
it was very cold yesterday, and so I spent the whole day doing some draft work. So be on the lookout for some draft coverage coming here on the channel, as well as across social media. A lot of good things happening. This class, as you get deeper down into day 2 and things like that, I see some players that are kind of interesting. Not the biggest players though, always, like there are some really good players that are like 5'10", 5'11", that can really shoot that puck and play good defense that I know no one wants to hear about. And that's the unfortunate part of this draft class, but we'll start getting a steady stream of information about the draft class here moving forward. But I think other than that, that's it. Enjoy the game, Matthew. Everyone enjoy the game. Thanks for hopping in here, checking out the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. We went about just shy of 45 minutes, but that's a pretty good sweet spot for a Sunday. All right, for Matthew Fairburn, for the production crew, and for myself, thanks again for hopping in. Hit that like button on your way out, and we'll see you again next time.